Hello, everyone, and welcome to the O7 podcast, a show exclusively about the films of 2007. I'm Tay, and I'm joined by my co-host, Lucy Alfred. Lucy, how are you doing today?
I'm great, thanks, Tay. Bit tired today. Had a long day at work.
Well, how about we tear Sunshine a new space hole, see if that makes you feel any better. How's that sound?
Yeah, sure. Let's do it.
All right, Sunshine is an epic science fiction thriller from Danny Boyle and Alex Garland, set on a spaceship, the Icarus II. Crewed by 8 astronauts, they are on course to our dying sun to try and kickstart it back into life with the biggest nuclear bomb our planet could possibly create. Yes, let's go and nuke the sun.
America!
That's what I thought. It feels positively Trumpian. He wanted to nuke hurricanes, so this just feels like a natural step up for him.
He also wanted to inject people with bleach to cure them of COVID. So.
Peak Trump, I think.
Wait, so does that mean that Danny Boyle was imagining or prophesying about the future like The Simpsons did with Trump?
Yeah, there's a lot we could speculate on, not least the differences in opinion that rose up between Alex Garland and Danny Boyle when they were making this film. But before we get into it, I just want to point out that Sunshine does feature stuff about suicide, and we're going to talk about it. But we will put time codes in the show notes for when we talk about that. So if you are in any way sensitive to that subject, then maybe skip that section. Just refer to the show notes for the timings. Lucy, tell me about your reaction to this film. I get the impression that you found it a bit frustrating.
Well, it started off great. I even messaged you in caps lock, everyone is in this film, exclamation mark, exclamation mark. Very excited to see that.
Yep, there's an amazing cast. Let's get them in here now. We have a crew of 8 scientists made up of a physicist, Kappa, played by Cillian Murphy, the Captain Kaneda, played by Hiroyuki Sanada, the second in command and the comms officer Harvey, played by Troy Garrity, the psychologist Searle, played by Cliff Curtis, Cassie the pilot, played by Rose Byrne, and Corazon or Corey the botanist, played by Michelle Yeoh, Mace the engineer, played by Chris Evans, and Trey the navigator, played by Benedict Wong. And Benedict Wong, who is great in this film, is doing something interesting with his accent.
I was trying to place him because I've seen him in something recently. I remember what it was. He's in Three Body Problem, isn't he?
He is in the Three Body Problem, yes.
And he plays like he's like from Sheffield or Manchester or something in that. Maybe that's his natural accent.
Yeah, I think it's his natural accent.
Yeah.
I think he's a northerner. He's from Eccles. There you go. Yeah, his accent is doing stuff in this film. I think it's, I want to say New England, but I'm not sure. I'm not 100%. It is a weird one. It could be down to, well, the idea for the casting of the crew was that this was a global problem. And so all of these nations collaborated and mined all of the planet's remaining nuclear materials to make this bomb after the original mission, Icarus I, had failed 7 years earlier. And so they did this second one, and it was their last chance to do this. So the crew would be fully international because of all of the rich economies that had contributed so much to the mission. But I don't think it would have been too distracting for Benedict Wong to just have his regular British accent. I think this crew was missing a Brit just to make jokes or to flip a table or something.
Be the baddie. You've also got Mark Strong. He's barely in it, though.
Yeah, Mark Strong is also in this. He plays Pim Backer, who is the captain of Icarus I.
So you've got some big names, and they were already fairly big for the time, but much bigger these days. So I was really excited. I love a sci-fi, but Tay, you had warned me that it's a film of 3/3, and the first 2/3 are sort of much loved, and the last third is much maligned. And I kind of wish I didn't know that, but I was waiting for that third to start, and then when it did start, I knew it was starting, and I thought, what the actual F? And I proceeded to then be completely distracted. It completely lost me.
Oh no, I fucked it up.
No, you didn't fuck it up. Danny Boyle fucked it up. I just was like, this film, it's just become another film. It started off as a kind of sci-fi thriller, everyone's got to save the world kind of vibe. And then it ended up becoming a sort of monster horror film and just was completely unnecessary. And when we were messaging, I likened it to my reaction to the original It film, the Stephen King adaptation, which for most of the film is a really creepy horror that absolutely terrified me. I watched it at a sleepover with my friends and we all just kept imagining it coming down the chimney upside down, and so we couldn't sleep. And then right at the end, he turns into this massive giant spider thing and flies off into space or something like that. And it completely lost me. All that is to say, I didn't hate it. I just was super let down by the end, the last third.
You see, I think I benefited from watching this in the cinema in 2007 because you had the scale and the spectacle of it and the sound. The sound is amazing in a cinema. I remember that, and all of these crises that this crew had to deal with just felt so much more palpable in the cinema. And another thing I remember from the time was one of the things they did to market this film was they put a load of film journalists into stunt planes with a stunt pilot, and they each of them held a branded sunshine sponge. And the idea was that the pilot would do some moves that generate zero gravity, and then you'd have some footage of the sponge floating in front of you. So somewhere in the BBC archives, there's some footage of my face being contorted into rubber while this branded sponge floats in front of me. Epic content. And also what I remember is that the screening that I went to, there was a little talk at the end with Brian Cox, who wasn't as big then as he is now. I also read recently that Cillian Murphy's character Kappa is based on Brian Cox, but that can't be true, can it?
He's nothing like him apart from being a physicist. He hasn't got that, "Hi, I'm Brian Cox" voice. What do you think of my impression of Brian Cox?
I thought it was good. You should do that more often. Can you bring that in as a regular character? As I say, I had the benefit of seeing this in the cinema, and I think that carried me over the line. But I do appreciate that the third act is a bit of a right turn into horror. Some people say that it goes supernatural, but I don't think it does really. Pinbacker, Mark Strong's character, is just a guy, I think.
I think at first it's set up as that because he's got this kind of otherworldly voice and says, "I've been waiting a long time for you." And my immediate thought was, oh my gosh, is this the devil? Because he says something like, at the end of time, there'll be one man, blah, blah, blah. And he's talking to Cillian Murphy, who has been set up as the most important person in the crew because he is the only person that knows how to detonate the payload, as they call it. So by this point, you know that it's all on him, and he knows it too. All of these other crises have occurred. We haven't really touched on those yet, but we will get into it. I think at first I thought it was going to be the devil because they'd already been set up that someone on Icarus 1 was a bit of a religious nut and had left this strange message that they had managed to get hold of when they found Icarus 1. But by that point, that was all it was. So I just wondered if he was a demon or the devil or something. And then realised that he wasn't. But it was so unbelievable.
Yeah, I mean, naming your ship after the Greek figure who flew too close to the sun, melted his wings and died is maybe not the best omen. Lucy, how does the crew find Icarus 1?
They find the Icarus 1 after a crew member on Icarus 2 hears a distress signal.
Harvey, yeah.
That's been magnified from the back of Mercury. And
out of Mercury's bum, yep. Sorry, I'm gonna stop now.
Keep it in. They hear the distress signal and they make a decision whether or not they're going to find the Icarus 1. There's quite a lot of a difference of opinion. Chris Evans' character, who's kind of pitted as the sort of like jarhead. I think at one point Michelle Yeoh calls him flyboy. He says, no, our main mission here is to deliver the payload into the sun, which at first I was like, yeah, he sounds like the only one making sense. Long story short, if they go to find Icarus 1, they then have 2 chances to deliver the payload. If their one doesn't work, they've got another payload to use.
And that conversation is interesting because they say, okay, should we vote? And they decide not to vote. They put all of the pressure on Kappa because he's the physicist.
Yeah.
And then ultimately that sets in motion a whole series of crises that they have to deal with. I feel it was, maybe they should have had a vote. One thing we should point out about the Icarus 2 is that the whole front of it is like a massive heat shield. So the opening shot is where you think you're looking at the sun, and then the camera moves around to the side of it, and then you realise that you're seeing a reflection of the sun in the heat shield. And it's actually this massive golden dome, basically, and the ship is tucked in behind it. So when Trey makes the calculations around fuel and trajectories, he forgets to adjust the angle of the shield relative to the sun. So as they change trajectory, then some of the panels that make up the heat shield get damaged. So the first crisis sees Cassie having to, well, first override the computer and then align the ship in such a way that the damaged panels are in shadow. And then that enables Kappa and Kaneda to go out and fix the panels. Now, why Kappa and Kaneda? Well, I guess Kaneda is the captain, so he goes out, and Kappa seems to go out purely because Mace volunteers him. I don't think that Mace and Kappa are big fans of each other. I don't think they get on. So, yeah, so they go out in these insane-looking spacesuits. They have like a tiny little slot at the front just for seeing you don't want to see too much of the sun. They're really good design. They make you feel really claustrophobic. And they're out there and they quickly figure out that, yeah, they can repair these panels. So it's big sighs of relief all round, especially for Trey, because he blames himself for the predicament that they're in. May says something to Trey at this point, but we'll talk about it later when it's more relevant. So yeah, it initially looks like they're going to be okay, but then a problem arises. Their new alignment to the sun has meant that their comms tower keeps rotating outside of the protection of the heat shield. And every time it rotates outside of that, it gets hotter. And at one point, it's so hot that it ignites the oxygen in their oxygen garden, which is where they grow all their food and get a lot of their oxygen. That starts a fire. And then the fire compels the ship's computer to kind of take back control over the ship and try to realign itself so that it can fully protect the ship. And then this causes the crew to fight over whether or not to let the computer regain control, because while it would safeguard the bits of the ship that are exposed, it also risks exposing Kappa and Kaneda, who are outside trying to fix the panels. So Mace, because he's all about the mission, he refuses to add a kind of second authorization to override the ship. And Kaneda backs him up. So there's a race against time for Kappa and Kaneda to make these repairs and get back inside. Kaneda orders Kappa to go inside because he knows that Kappa is the highest priority crew member. He's the only one who can operate the bomb, or the payload as they call it. And Kaneda sacrifices himself and gets fried by the sun.
I think it would be good here to talk about the surrealistic elements that litter this film. Of course, yes, Kaneda, the captain, does sacrifice himself, but there's an allusion to this sort of magnetic pull to the sun, which had been set up by, is it Searle, Cliff Curtis?
Searle, yeah.
You'd seen him earlier in the film, sat on a bench, looking at the sun and asking the computer to change the filters so he could see the sun more closely. And the computer says, if I do that, you'll blind yourself, essentially. But when Kaneda sacrifices himself, he looks at the sun and he's just drawn to it. And then it's intercut with Searle saying, what can you see? What can you see? And the sun is suddenly not this big star. It's got this otherworldly, slightly ethereal element to it, which does sort of carry on throughout the rest of the film. But yeah, there's an element of the surreal. It could also be that's what he's spent his life up to this point focusing on. The sun's been dying. He's now on a mission to save the sun. So I guess you're looking down the barrel of the gun in a way. But it's definitely sort of posited as this kind of magnetic force that they can't resist. Which brings me nicely on to the point that I wanted to make, which is for the first 2/3 of the film, the sun is the bad guy. There isn't really like a baddie in the film. Like Chris Evans's character, Mace, is kind of set up as, like I said, that kind of jockey guy, and he's a bit of an idiot. But, you know, ultimately he's there to do a job and he's there to save the world. So the sun is this evil force that is damaging their ship, but also it's dying, so they need to save it. It is their saviour, so it's kind of this dichotomy there. And then, of course, the last third, we get a new baddie. I like to talk about baddies and goodies when I talk about films. So yeah, but there is also something about, I don't know if you noticed this or remember this, there's so many super extreme close-ups of eyes and like the corners of people's faces. So you see Searle's eyes looking at the sun from inside his glasses, super, super close. And I'm not really sure what the significance of that is, apart from, because you can't really see reaction because it's too close. You can't see really any emotion. I don't know if you had any insight or ideas as to what that significance of it is.
Yeah, so I suspect that some of this might have been down to budget, but to hear the commentary, they wanted to find different ways to show the relationship between the sun and humanity. So, you know, as you point out, Searle discovers early on that you can almost take a bath in light if you dial up the sun's power in the observation deck. And that's where we see the first of these close-up sort of eyeball shots. They wanted creative ways basically to show the sun and its relationship to the crew, and also to underline, you know, while the sun is essential, it's also deadly to them, even to look at. They actually shot a lot of these shots with all of the crew, and I think at one point Danny Boyle says that they swapped an actor's eyeball for someone else. So I think one point you're looking at Searle and you think it's Searle, and the close-up of the eye is actually that of Kaneda. I think it's just because they didn't get the right angle that they needed with Cliff Curtis. So, yeah, there's some definite intentions about visualising the sun and its relationship to the crew here. Another interesting thing that they did to try and make this look more distinctive was that they deliberately lit the crew and the quarters just in very dreary colours. There's no orange in there, it's just all greys and blues and greens. And they did that because they wanted to save all of the orange for those shots with the sun and the heat shield, so that they would just be that much more impactful when you saw them. It's stuff like that that just sells the idea that this film technically is really amazing. Like, it looks so legitimately science fiction-y. There's obvious nods to Solaris and 2001 and Alien to a degree. Clearly a lot of thought and effort went into making it look as sort of timeless as possible. But yeah, it's just a shame that the two people behind this film didn't agree on the ending, and so there's tension there. And you've really got to wonder what chance it had. And I don't know if the studio had an issue with the original ending, if we don't have the original ending, or if they pushed for a shift in genre. It could be down to limited budget. Horror is cheaper, but it is definitely the thing that most people talk about when they talk about Sunshine is, you know, what happened with the ending. I
think the ending, once you know what happened between Danny Boyle and Alex Garland, it kind of makes sense. But the way that I interpreted the ending's representation of their disagreement was not so much that the ending was disagreed upon, it was more that the ending was a way of kind of appeasing both parties. I could be wrong here, but from what I had gleaned from my research, Danny Boyle wanted it to be a film about sort of heroes saving the world and giving life on Earth a second chance, whereas Alex Garland felt opposed to that because his philosophy was, that's fine, but then you're just delaying the inevitable because the sun will die at some point, and you're just delaying death for future generations, which is kind of, apt when the article that I read, they said, today people are questioning whether or not to have children because we are existing in a climate crisis, and they are concerned for future generations' lives. And so I think they both had a point. I would say probably in a way I can understand the philosophy of Alex Garland a bit more than Danny Boyle, which it felt like he wanted to kind of make a bit more of a saleable Hollywood film where scientists and nerds go and save the world. But I feel like the ending as it is was a way of kind of going, well, they do still save the world, but there is some force who opposes that, and that is why the Icarus one failed, because it was sabotaged by a religious fanatic who has said we shouldn't play God, which I also agree with. So it's one of those where I can understand why the ending is the way it is now that I know that, but I just still don't feel like it's not satisfying.
I don't think there's a right or wrong answer to that, and I don't think we'll ever know now. So, yeah.
Well, I wonder if the film looked different to start with. The ending. I wonder if the ending looked different. Maybe his idea was that they didn't succeed and the world ended, and then Danny Boyle was like, "No, we absolutely can't do that. We've got to have some sort of heroic ending." I don't know. I was just thinking, actually, a fun film to compare this to in an essay. If anyone's listening, studying film, you can have this one for free. Comparing this one with Don't Look Up, the Leonardo DiCaprio film about the comet that's coming to Earth, and the whole film is about different parties trying to work out what to do about the problem. Eventually, the comet comes.
Yeah, good shout, yeah. Anyway, back to the story. Shut up. So they've averted one crisis, but at great cost. They've lost their captain and they've lost a lot of food and oxygen, and Trey has been sedated and is now deemed a suicide risk. Corey, Cassie and Mace have a conversation about whether they have enough food or air, and Corey estimates that they would need to lose 3 more crew members in order to have enough oxygen to complete the mission. So that's kind of like lurking in the background. And in the meantime, they rendezvous with Icarus One. Mace, Kappa, Searle and Harvey go on board and try to figure out whether or not they can salvage food, oxygen, and the payload, and really just to try and figure out what happened to the crew of Icarus One. This section for me just felt like the closest to Alien, I guess. There's even a reference to Alien. It felt like an excuse just to do a bunch of jump scares. So they find the remains of the Icarus One crew in the ship's observation deck, and it looks like they've all sort of self-incinerated, so they must have just lifted up all the filters. The ship is caked in dust, so implying that, they're walking around in the remains of the crew. On the plus side, they do find a really thriving oxygen garden, and the Icarus One payload is intact. So it feels like the initial risk that they took seems to have paid off. So, cheers all round. And then obviously, naturally, everything goes to shit. The dock that they've established with Icarus One is mysteriously damaged and ripped apart, basically. And they're now stuck on the Icarus One. The only way that they can get back to the Icarus 2 is using spacesuits, and the catch then is that there's only one working spacesuit. And it's at this point where Harvey, who's always been sort of talked down and overlooked But he's now in command. He makes a point that he should be the one in the spacesuit because a mission needs its captain. And Searle and Mace immediately put him down and point out that he can't operate the payload. So he's overridden. There's a great line about him being a comms officer on a ship with no comms. So, what good is he anyway? I start to feel for Harvey at this point. To make matters worse, the ship's computer is down. So one of them would need to stay behind and open and close the ship's seal so that the others can escape back to the Icarus II. And it's at this point that Harvey's complete redundancy just kind of peaks, and he says, all right, I get it. It's me. I'm not important. I'll be the one to stay behind. And it's a really funny moment. And in fact, Searle kind of steps up here, and this is kind of Searle's moment to be a hero. Harvey breathes a sigh of relief and joins Mace in trying to insulate himself using materials from the ship for when they spacewalk over to Icarus II with Kappa. Presumably they're going to huddle up close to Kappa for warmth, I guess. The
cold is pointed out by Michelle Yeoh's character, Corazon, when she says it's like minus 200 and something degrees. And then they wrap themselves up in insulation and hope that is going to... I was like, this is so ridiculous. That bit annoyed me. I've got quite a lot of notes where I've written ridiculous things like this would never happen. That was one of them. They've wrapped themselves up in a bit of bloody tinfoil and they're jumping out into space, and then all that Chris Evans gets is a blanket and he got a bit of frostbite on one of his fingers. Ridiculous. Totally ridiculous. They're like, close your eyes and jump. Yeah, we could argue the merits of a film about astronauts travelling to the sun and things being unrealistic. But, in for a penny, in for a pound, I say. It's not that unbelievable that the sun is dying in this film, because the sun will die, and it is something that we know will happen because stars die. Whether or not the human race, as it is today, will be there to witness it, who knows? But that is not that unbelievable. It's just unbelievable that it would be happening in 2057. I know. The film isn't completely solid with its logic, shall we say. So they go on their little spacewalk, trying to zip across the gap between the two ships. When Searle steps up, I thought, oh, great, Harvey's going to survive. I was feeling sorry for him at that point. And then he immediately dies by letting go of Kappa's suit. And he gets frozen solid, and then he gets his arm smashed off. And then he just gets zapped by the sun like a little bug. He's just like, beep. Well, as Pinbacker says, we are but dust. From dust we came, to dust we will return. Poor old Harvey. Poor Harvey. He went out bad. Bye-bye Harvey and bye-bye Searle. Searle incinerates himself, which kind of mirrors his beginning of the film. He goes to the observation deck on the Icarus I and just lets the shield up so he can, top off his tan. Kappa and Mace get back on to the Icarus II safely. They dock and the ship goes back behind the heat shield and docks, and then they carry on with the mission. Without a new bomb, so they're going to have to make do with the one they had, and they've lost 2 more crew members. Yeah, but it is good because they lost, 2 more crew members, which is kind of vital for survival at this point, because we've already found out that they basically need to lose 3 crew members, and then I think they end up realising they need to lose 4. Yeah, they could have enough air to survive, but not enough to save Trey. And just to hark back to when Trey messed up and it looked like Kaneda and Kappa could repair the panels, May says to him, don't kill yourself, all right? We've got this. Which I think in retrospect is quite dark and foreboding. And then we're on to what I think is the best scene, where Mace, Corey, Kappa and Cassie sit down. And firstly, they discuss who might have sabotaged the airlock. And then they get onto whether or not they let Trey live or die in order to secure the oxygen they need to complete the mission. And this time they do have a vote. The vote is 3-1 to dispense with Trey, and unsurprisingly,
Mace volunteers to do it. I really like this scene. It's really good and tense and sad. And Rose Byrne is particularly good in this as well. So Mace goes to where Trey should be, and he's not there. And then they find Trey in the, like the equivalent of their holodeck. And it appears like he's committed suicide. So, Lucy, do you think Trey committed suicide?
Oh my gosh. I hadn't thought about it.
Yeah, so I completely missed this, but Boyle explains it in the commentary. Certainly the crew think that he killed himself, but there's a shot where Mace pulls out a tray of like surgical instruments and there's one missing, and he picks up the one that is there to dispatch with Trey and then discovers Trey in the holodeck. So Boyle explains in the commentary that Pinbacker is now on board the ship, and in order to hide the fact that he is on board, he makes it look like Trey killed himself, but in fact, Pinbacker did it.
I don't think I got that at all, and I think you'd be forgiven for thinking it was as it seemed, because also that's just very convenient for Pinbacker to have done it to him, knowing somehow that everyone would believe that he had died by suicide. How could Pinbacker have known that he was on suicide watch,
Yeah, and I guess we'll never know, right? But yeah, it's very sad. And then it's basically a horror film from here on out. The ship's computer asks Kappa how they expect to survive, still with 5 members on board. And Kappa lists the surviving crew as 4, and then the computer says, no, there's one more person on board.
But do you know what I thought? I thought it was that Rose Byrne's character, that she was pregnant.
Oh, okay.
Because early on in the film, you see Kappa and Cassie sort of in bed together talking about their dreams and how they always dream about the surface of the sun. And so I thought it was the story was going to take another turn. Was not expecting it to be a melted man. Yeah,
so at this point we're introduced to Mark Strong's character, Pinbacker, captain of the Icarus I. We don't really see him. It's all prosthetics and shimmery effects. But he's obviously terribly burnt.
I think that also serves to set him up with a semi-otherworldly vibe, because he, like you say, you never see just a full frontal shot. And there's always this kind of like kind of background noise to his voice, and you see him in this canted angle, and it's like you say, it's all sort of shimmery and pixelated, whereas everyone else is shot normally. So potentially if you are just going to look at that, perhaps you could say, yeah, he is sort of otherworldly, but I think it just helps to set him up as this super monstrous. But it was annoying because I really wanted to see him. I wanted to see I wanted to see the grotesqueness.
Come on, Danny, show us the baddie.
Yeah. Bloody hell, Danny Boyle, I want to see his face.
So Pinbacker stalks the rest of the crew, and ultimately everybody dies. The only person I think who dies a true tragic death is Mace. And the way he dies is teased ahead of time. So earlier in the film, we see that the ship's computer is kept in a kind of vat of coolant, and Mace drops a spanner in the coolant and reaches in to get it. And you see like the icy liquid crack up his arm, and so you think like, oh, you don't want to fall in that, mate. And when Pinbacker is on board, he takes the computer out of the coolant and the systems start to fail. And to get it working, Mace has to get in there with a spanner and tighten some nuts, I guess, or do something. Anyway, he ends up dying because of getting in there in the most, I think, genuinely tragic way. I thought Harvey got it bad, but Mace really gets it bad. I think he just gets his shoe caught on it or something, and then gets dragged down. Justice for Mace.
Poor old Mace. Yeah, but he was always going to die a death like that because he really believes in the mission. Not that they all don't, but like he's kind of super vocal about it. And he's the most martyr-like, isn't he? Gonna gonna sacrifice myself for America.
I'm gonna nuke that sun into space hole.
Yeah, I'm gonna blast it into the back of space. I'm gonna blast it back to the Big Bang.
So the end of this film is a whole mishmash of visual effects and a chase scene. You get Kappa and Cassie racing to deliver the payload, and Pim Bakker is chasing them. And, I really like this film for all of its faults. But I'm not sure that even I have it in me to finish describing this film.
Well, good, I'm going to do it for you, because we've seen it before. It's like just at the end, when the hero's about to save the day, the baddie comes in and tries to jeopardize it. Like, we've seen it before. We've seen it hundreds of times before. I was actually thinking, like, when are we going to see a space film where, like, space isn't like the baddie, like, where like all I could think about was, is it called, what's that film about where there's the ship that's sinking?
The Poseidon Adventure.
The bloody Poseidon Adventure. And that film, I think, contributed to my fear of, like, claustrophobia and why I'd never go on a cruise ship. But it's that thing of, you're in this, like, relative safety, and all of a sudden, like, you're just so vulnerable because you're in a place that you're just not designed to be.
Yeah. I mean, cruises. Yeah, the film ends. There's a happy ending of sorts. There you go. I don't really know how else could it have ended. It's obviously a man versus nature, and nature is nature God kind of film, right? Pim Bakker talks a lot about God. The thing that I like about it is that it goes to such great lengths to capture me in the first two acts. And, it is really tense and tragic and really well played. And all of that momentum generated enough goodwill in me to just carry me over the line on the last act. And, where I'm at the point where it's like, it's fine. But when I can be bothered, I have struggled to think of alternatives for how it could end. I guess you could have, like, one of the crew basically take on the Pim Bakker role and just stop things from happening. So maybe there's a tension between the remaining crew and the one who's a convert. But, I don't know. Like, Lucy, fix this film.
Yeah, I disagree. I think it could have just carried on with the various crises that happen when you are humans in space on a mission towards the sun. And that's what happens in the first couple of thirds, where everything starts to go wrong from a tiny error of calculation and sort of lapse in memory of changing the course of the computer, and the sun is what damages the ship, and various things do go wrong on space missions frequently, and they are super high risk. So I just think there could have just been a few more crises. They didn't need to have this voice of reason coming in, but you can't be the grumpy old man for every episode, hey, and I have taken on the GOM role for this episode.
When they were doing publicity, they rolled out Brian Cox a lot, doing press and just saying, oh, this is rooted in sound science.
You got to do it much more slowly. Take that down like 2 speed. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
0.5 speed.
Oh, sorry.
It's all rooted in science.
You know space, right? Well, space is ace, innit?
I'm Brian Cox. It's brilliant. I love space. There you go. It's got to be slow.
Great. Thanks, Lucy.
I really hope you listen to this. Brian, we love you. You're very cool.
I do wonder if this film would have fared differently in 2025. Lucy?
You would just never have a person making decisions like that. Those calculations would be done by a computer. When Icarus takes over, because of the explosion, I thought, oh, this is a film about AI taking over. So there was that. But actually, I think it stands up. I don't think it felt dated in any way. Visually, like you say, narratively, it does stand up. I think that it is overall, like, it doesn't feel like a dated film. It doesn't feel like we're really like, oh my gosh, you can tell this was made in 2007. The CGI is great, super believable. Like, I think it's good. So yeah, I don't think there's an element of like 2025 goggles. I think there probably would be more women in the film now. I think, like I said, I think it stands up.
I do like the fact that it was early on, having quite an international cast, and no one was calling it woke or whatever.
Oh gosh, yeah. I have nothing else to say apart from I did enjoy the first 2/3. I like a good sci-fi. This is a good sci-fi film. And it made me love Interstellar even more than I did already.
I feel pretty bad because when you were texting me initially, I got the sense that, oh, Lucy's into it. Great. And then, you know, towards the end when you were still texting me, I felt like I've walked a load of dog poop all around Lucy's brand new carpet. Lucy, who do you blame for the end? Danny Boyle or Alex Garland?
Danny Boyle.
You see, I blame Alex Garland, but that's probably unfair because, you know, writers don't get much of a say ultimately.
But like I said, I wonder if he wanted the story to go in a different direction and then couldn't, so we got the ending we got. Or we got the last third that we got, let's say.
Yeah, that was Sunshine. I'm going to say that in spite of everything we've said, I think it still stands within the pantheon of good films of 2007, just, I would say, with big asterisks everywhere. It does take a big swing and, you know, points for effort. So, Lucy, thank you for enduring Sunshine, the film, and the recording of this podcast. So next week we're going to talk about Hot Fuzz, and it will be joyous, although I do think it should be treated sensitively because of my West Country background.
Your rural affliction, my lover. Yes.
Yeah, which is right. So we would say homework time, watch Hot Fuzz. We're obviously going to spoil it. But it is excellent. There's no flaccid third act in Hot Fuzz. It just ramps up. But I'm sure everybody's seen it who needs to see it.
Yeah, I feel like of the films of 2007, most people, I guess, who will be listening to this are going to be millennial / what are you? Are you Gen X?
I am Gen X, yes.
I feel like you're not. I know you are, but you also aren't.
That's the whole premise. Isn't that the premise of this podcast, that I'm Gen X?
Yeah, I forget though.
Should we get a Gen Z person in, like a third wheel?
Isn't there? No, thanks. Isn't there such thing as a zillennial? Isn't that what you actually are?
Hang on, so what?
It's Gen X people that are young Gen Xs who have more of a...
Wait, so is it a millennial but spelled with an X?
No, who have more of a foot in the millennial wheelhouse, I think. Google it.
Okay.
Look it up. Look it up.
Anyway, thanks, Lucy, and thanks everyone for listening, and see you next week. It's going to be awesome.
Yeah, can't wait. It's going to be great.